I'm glad this is a smaller room so we can be more conversational here. Hopefully I'll have time for questions. And I want to maybe share with you some of the recent features in Google Tag Manager, tell you a bit more about some of the challenges that I know a lot of your customers face, a lot of you face, for those of you who use Google Tag Manager, and how we think about these things. And then we'll have some advice on how to integrate this with your workflows, and some advice on tagging in a more intelligent way, right? So spending less effort to achieve your tagging goals. So before I get too far here, how many of you, if you can show me hands, how many of you use Google Tag Manager already? Okay. And how many are not using Google Tag Manager, but you're trying to figure out if it's something you need or you're interested in it? Anyone? Few. Okay. Excellent. So we'll do a quick overview of what tag management is, and then we'll jump into some of the more interesting content. And I know for some of you who attended last year, some of the other conferences, a few of these slides will look familiar. Not to worry, I assure you the content will overall be different and interesting for you. And if it's not, then you can tell me and throw something at me, and we'll jump to the product and do it that way. So, I think tagging, when we talk about tagging, we typically talk about getting code implemented on a website or a mobile app or something like that. And at one point when we first set out to do analytics, maybe web analytics, when it evolved 20, 25 years ago, however long, it was much easier because there weren't as many of these tags, right? You implemented it once and you were pretty much set to go. And now there's tons and tons of code, and there's all types of use cases. We were hearing with the airline in Mexico, needing to implement all of these tags to achieve their measurement objectives. And it's a lot of work, right? And it involves typically a lot of back and forth without a tag management system with your IT team, right? Asking your developers to do things. And I think in this way it's very complex because there's a lot of things that you want to measure, interactions, page views obviously, but also purchases and form submissions and clicks. And there's a lot of places you want to send that data, right? Google places like Google Analytics and AdWords and DoubleClick, but also third-party tools. And this is just a very small subset, right? But there's tons and tons of places you want to send data, and this creates a lot of work. It's very complex. Now, what Tag Manager is, what a tag management system, of course, is a way to streamline this, to reduce the complexity, and it enables you to sort of have one place that you're initiating all of these interactions, you're measuring them to, and then use that tool as an interface to send data off to all the places you need to send data. So I was very interested, I know there's a lot of questions about security and speed and things like that. We'll talk about some of that here. But in general, I think of this as a tool that's actually beneficial for these things, right? It's actually, you're gaining value by using a tag management system over putting code directly on your site. And let's take another look. So it has a lot of powerful features, right? Things like version control, right? I think I have there we go. Yeah, so version control, the ability to roll out changes to your measurement tags or your widgets or whatever else you're implementing with Google Tag Manager over time, and to be able to see what's happening, and also to be able to preview those versions before you publish them live is a huge benefit, right? So if you have a security team that's particularly concerned, let them preview everything. They can see exactly what's going to happen when you hit the publish button. This is not necessarily the case if you were to email them some code, right? Security features, and we'll talk more about this because I think security is extremely important and it's top of mind whenever we're building anything with Google Tag Manager. But we have a host of security features built into Google Tag Manager. What you're seeing is one of the ones we launched in the last year. It's called malware detection. So now whenever you use custom scripts, we'll automatically scan them for you and tell you if we've detected a URL that's redirecting to another URL that's delivering malware or something like that. So we're keeping an eye on these custom scripts to make sure that it doesn't get used. And it happens occasionally, not too often, thankfully. But with this feature, you can rest assured that the code will not be able to do things that you don't want it to do in a lot of ways. And if this happens, we'll notify you and we'll email you, and we will pause those tags from firing, right? So malware will stop. This obviously would not happen if you were just putting code directly on your site. If you took some third-party code from an agency, or not saying that any of the fine agencies or partners here would give you bad code, but if that did happen for some reason, this would prevent any problems. All right. So why should you care? There's a lot of numbers on this chart, and we could go through them in depth. This is from, I believe, an eMarketer study, but the gist of this is that tag management leads to faster marketing and better measurement, right? You want to be able to measure everything you're doing, and you need to be able to do it quick. You need to be able to make changes on the fly. You need to be able to, we talked this morning about all of these cool things you can do when you're measuring things, and when everything's integrated properly and you have Optimize implemented and you have DoubleClick in play. But that takes data. We have a lot of data already, but sometimes we need to make changes to it very quickly. Sometimes we need to get new tags out faster. You've probably heard this before if you're in this space. And better measurement, right? If you're emailing code back and forth to implement on a site, typos happen. I can't tell you how many hours. I'm remembering one case where we spent maybe like 3 solid days trying to figure out why code wasn't working. This is before GTM. And it turned out that somehow there was a question mark in the JavaScript which was encoded in some weird way, right? It wasn't actually a question mark, but it really looked like it. And these types of errors, when you're working with tags that we've implemented, we've integrated in a first-party way, are much less likely to happen. And if they do happen, they're much easier to fix, right? So a couple of the reasons why it's faster and better. So with that, I want to talk a bit about integrating tag management into your workflows. And I think I'm going fairly quick here. Is this pace okay for people? Okay, great. So a lot of people think of tag management as a way to get around IT. And we heard some examples of why this is really beneficial in some cases, right? You need to be able to do things faster and not have to worry about these, the workflow of having everything go through IT all the time. But I also like to think of tag management systems as a way to collaborate better with IT, right? Is anybody here a developer or in the IT space? Okay, 1 or 2 people. So, I don't think of tag management as a way to get around IT. I think of it's a way to streamline those workflows, and my engineering team absolutely feels the same way, I guarantee you, as developers themselves. So the features that we build are definitely intended to make that happen. And I think the best way to succeed in tag management is to start off, if you're able to, and sometimes I know, depending on the situation, you have to do things a little bit faster. If you're able to start off with a conversation with your IT team and have a conversation about what is the goal of this tool, right? Who should own it, right? Who should have what access level? Because there are security concerns. If somebody were to get access to this who shouldn't have access to this, and they can publish some custom script. There was a question that came up in the last session, I believe, or 2 sessions ago, about, well, what if somebody were to steal credit cards, right? And I think the answer from somebody in the audience was, well, it's your tags, right? You should know what's happening. Theoretically, that's true, but it's also possible if somebody were to get in, they could write some malicious script that would do something and you might not realize. Right, so these are very powerful tools. I'll kind of throw that out there, and that's my red flag warnings. Think about security. So let's talk about what that means and how you can start to do this. So the first thing, and I realize this is a very bright screen for such a small, dark room, but bear with me. So I think the first thing to think about is user access and security. So who owns this container? And we have a variety of user access levels. We actually just changed this maybe 2 or 3 months ago when we launched our workspaces feature set, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But the user access levels we have now are no access, read, edit, approve, and publish. So let's talk a little bit about what this is, because I think it'll start to make sense about who should have what access level. So no access is pretty clear, right? This person doesn't have access. Marquee marketer doesn't have access to our cool company website 1, right? It makes sense. And read, it makes sense, right? You can look at stuff, but you can't change anything. So edit is the first one that probably needs a little bit of explanation. So I would say users with less technical background, you can give them edit access. And what they're able to do is to go in, and before we launched this workspace feature set, these users with edit access were able to create versions, right? So the way the Tag Manager, Google Tag Manager works, you have a bunch of tag changes, and when you're ready to publish them, or you want to call that like a moment in time that you'll be able to look back at or roll back to, you create a version. And if you publish, it's actually creating a version for you in the background. So you can look at that version history and see all the times you published or all the times you created versions. And when you version something, you're essentially putting it in a queue to get published, right? So if I create a version and then, Paul comes and publishes it and doesn't realize that I had created a version, maybe my changes are being pushed out without him realizing because he didn't look detailed through the version history. So the first change we recently made is that edit users can now create workspaces, and I'll talk about what that is in a minute or two, and edit things in workspaces, but they cannot create versions, right? So if you want somebody to kind of suggest tagging, or maybe you're somebody who you feel shouldn't have that access to be able to publish things or put things in this queue, you can give yourself or have somebody give you edit access, and that way you can suggest things.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
So if somebody does have that level of permission, does the person who approves get notice that there's been this edit? Is there?
Yeah, so I can repeat the question too, since you asked. So I think if somebody has this access, would the person who approves get notification that that there were changes pending approval? Not at this point. You would still need to have a bit of a manual workflow there, where you would want this person to maybe send an email or ping or something like that. You can tell that there's room for improvement here, and this is definitely something that we're working on, so there'll be some further improvements in this area. Being notified when there are changes is absolutely something that will come. So edit access, right, if you just want to be able to suggest things. You can give somebody edit access without fear that they're going to screw something up, right? If you just want to let them try. And the cool thing is they can preview it. Right? So if you have somebody new on your team and you want them to learn the product, you can give them access to edit and preview, right? The next access here, approve, this access is essentially everything above it, but you can also create versions, right? So you're not able to publish, but you can basically, you're approving that something will happen on the site when the next time something gets published, right? And then the final access level is publish. And this publish access level, this is the person, these are the users who can actually make changes that go live, right? There's a little bit of some nuances to this in that we have environments as well. And currently, if you want to publish to a test environment or something like that, you still need publish access, right? And I realize that's probably a point that needs some improvement.
So can I ask, does the approve permission actually imply an action of approving, or is that understood to be the action of creating a version?
Today it's understood to be the action of creating a version, yes. I think we have an approval queue in Google Tag Manager today, and it's only used for our DCM integration, our DoubleClick Campaign Manager integration, which I'll mention in a few minutes. But like I said, this is obviously an area that we're thinking about, and we'll have more to share soon. Another question.
How you answer, for example, a bank that says, okay, for us it's so dangerous, doesn't do the compliance or the security that our banks do, because they can inject code in that, and we have some problems with banks in that point.
Absolutely, and this is a question that I think deeply about all the time. The first thing that I would say is the number of people who should have publish access should be very small, right? And depending on who you are, if you're a company that's extremely concerned about data security or changes made to the website, maybe for that company, only somebody in the IT team should have publish access, and it should still take an email to hit the button, right, or a conversation to hit the publish button. Even if the person on IT isn't doing all the tagging, right, maybe you say, hey, here's the version, I'll send you a link to preview it, go take a look through, make sure that this all meets your needs, and look at all the code, and then when you're comfortable, before Friday, hit publish, right? So that's an option. Obviously, that slows you down a little bit, and depending on the type of site, it's not always necessary. But if you're extremely concerned, that's something you can do. But let's keep going, because I think there's more here that will help. The next thing I would tell you is turn on two-step verification. This is a setting in the account settings on all GTM accounts. And essentially what this does is Google accounts have this thing that we call two-step verification, where you try to sign in and it sends you a text message, right? And it says, like, you enter this code. And it's an extra way to ensure the security. If you have this checked, you need to have two-step verification turned on in order to do certain things, like play with custom tags or publish things, right? So the reason I recommend this, even if only this IT person has access to publish, what happens if his account is violated, right? What happens if he leaves his laptop open somewhere in a cafe and somebody realizes who he is and what's going on and maliciously goes in and plays with custom code? Now, I don't mean to scare you, because this is, I do encourage you to think about this as a powerful tool, and because of that, something to think about in a secure way. And we think about that deeply all the time, so I want to kind of hand that down to all of you as well. So the next thing, and this is interesting, because this is something that you could optionally do. I don't necessarily recommend it, because it would sort of hinder your abilities to do a lot of custom things. But in the example of a bank, right? Let's say you're having a conversation. Let's say you work at a bank, or you're having a conversation about getting tagging up on a bank as a marketer, and your IT team says, no way, not at all. Even if I'm the one who can publish, how do I know something won't happen? And custom scripts won't be published. Well, we have this feature called tag blacklists and whitelists. And this is actually implemented in the data layer code on the page. And what you can do, we have all these codes, and there's full documentation here. There's a link. I have a few of these short links throughout this presentation. There's some cool stuff there if you take them down. This one just links you to our developer documentation. And what we do is we have a code, an ID for every tag, right? So if you wanted to whitelist and say, this container can only be used for GA and AdWords, you could do that, right? If you wanted to do the opposite, and you wanted to restrict tags, this one is restricting custom HTML. Custom HTML will not fire, will not run on this page. But the other thing we have what we call security groups or classes. And we have one called custom scripts. And this custom scripts class restricts custom HTML, custom JavaScript variables, and whatnot. And the cool thing about these security classes, I do recommend thinking about these security classes, because as we introduce new tags, we'll automatically put them in the right security class for you, right? So you don't have to think about blacklisting, HTML. If you were to blacklist HTML and custom JavaScript variables, and then we were to launch a new custom tag, right? You wouldn't have to go back in and update that, because you're using a class that will update for you. So if you take a look at that documentation, there's more about this. Again, use this sparingly as you need to, but it's there for you if you're having a difficult time convincing your organization, or you're yourself worried about somebody doing malicious things with custom scripts. It's possible, and we have it available for you. And we're thinking more about ways that we can do this type of thing. Okay, so that was primarily what I had to say about security. We can talk about it more in questions as we have time. But I want to talk about collaboration as well. So we launched a new feature set at the beginning of September called Workspaces. And what this allows you to do is to have different places, different spaces, where you can be making changes in parallel, right? And you can publish, for example, let's say we're working on a whole bunch of double-click tags, right? And all of a sudden somebody says, oh man, I want to publish a new custom dimension on our Google Analytics tag. And you say, well, it's going to have to wait, right? I can't publish these tags yet. I'm in the middle of testing them. No problem. Just come into this current workspace area or find the Manage Workspaces card. There's a plus button in the top right, which I'm not showing here. Create a new workspace, quick GA tag fix, right? Make the change, publish it, won't interrupt the other workspace at all. So we give you 3 of these workspaces. There's a default workspace that will always be there for you. So you don't have to think about this if it's not something that you think will be useful. 360 customers, Tag Manager 360 customers, will get unlimited workspaces. So if you are a GA360 customer or an optimized customer and you're not getting this today, reach out to your account managers or your partners or whoever you're working with and ask them about that, and they can get you enabled for this for free for Tag Manager 360, which will get you unlimited workspaces. And that's just one of a few premium features that we're thinking about for Tag Manager 360. The other cool thing here is, let's say I'm working on some changes over here and Daniel's working on some changes in the default workspace. When I go to create a version, I've actually made some changes that will impact his work. Maybe we're editing the same tag. Well, we'll let you know that. We'll tell you there's a conflict found. And we actually, if you click resolve here, I'm not showing you on the screen, but there's a really nice visual of all of the fields, and it will show you exactly what has changed. And you can either choose to take a change over or ignore it or whatever you'd like to do. So we worked a lot on making that really easy and a visual tool that you can use. And then, of course, the other thing that we were trying to do here is be much more transparent about what changes are being made when you hit that publish button. Right? So if you see here, you have all of the changes that are being made. I modified 3 GA tags, right? And I can click on each one of these and see what had changed. Likewise, if you look at the version history now and you click on a version, we'll tell you exactly what changes were made in that version. So these are a few things. We also revamped our UI. But I want to keep going in the interest of time. Okay, so I talked about test environments as well. This is a feature we launched about a year ago, actually. And this, if you're using more than one environment, which most companies are, maybe you want to be able to publish things to your QA environment or your staging environment or something like that. There's 2 ways to do this. You can either install a separate Tag Manager snippet, a new snippet of code on each of those environments so that it will always use the right environment. Or you can use links, like if you're familiar with our share preview functionality, you can access your testing environment with one of these links, and it will always, when you do that, show you the right container versions. When you go to publish now, it'll say live. And if you click that, it'll bring you into a screen like this, and there's a plus button up here which I cut off in the interest of fitting it on this screen, which will allow you to create new environments, and it'll ask you some questions about those to define them, and you'll be all set. When you publish from now on, you can just pick which environment you're publishing to. Okay, so I mentioned the DoubleClick integration. If you're using DoubleClick Campaign Manager, or you have people, whether they're at your company or an agency, using DCM.
Is there a limit to the number of environments?
There's not. No, and another cool thing I didn't mention about the environments is that they use an authorization token that can be repealed. So you can give a temporary authorization token to somebody who you want to be able to test something out for you. And then if you decide that they're no longer trustworthy or you're not working with them anymore, you can just reset it and turn it off. So DCM, this is DoubleClick Campaign Manager. I think the UI still looks like this. I took this screenshot a while ago. But the gist of this is you're linking your containers, and then the person who's working in DoubleClick can actually make a request and push that tag, that floodlight tag, to Google Tag Manager. So they're not actually creating rules here. They're not creating triggers. They're just saying, hey, this floodlight should fire on all receipt pages. Thanks. So they don't need to worry about all the logic in GTM. You're just kind of giving them, they're giving you instructions on what to do. This will show up in the approval queue in Google Tag Manager, and you can bring it into a workspace and kind of follow their instructions or not. It's up to you if you want to actually have it fire, right? But this can be a really beneficial thing if you are using DCM with floodlights. We don't have any, I can imagine some questions. This is the only product today that we have this tag push integrated with. That might change over time, no immediate plans, but it's definitely something we'd like to do. The next thing is the API, and I won't spend too much time on this, but I want to mention this because I think if you are technical or you're trying to do things at a very large scale, the API can be hugely beneficial. So we have a full functional API with an asterisk, which I'll explain in a minute. But it's really beneficial if you want to build tools for your marketers to accomplish tasks. So for example, you could have a spreadsheet and be able to set up all of your your tags in that spreadsheet and then use the API to push them all into GTM. Pretty cool. You can integrate into your existing workflow. For example, if you had a back-end system or something like that that needed tagging changes, could be integrated. A CMS, for example. And you can easily, as I mentioned, perform bulk edits. So if you decide you want to add a user to 100 different containers, much more easy to do with the API. The asterisk there was today, since we launched Workspaces 2 months ago, we haven't updated the API yet. And as a result, all the changes that you make with the API will go into that default workspace. Obviously, we're going to fix that, so stay tuned. There'll be a new version of the API with some other cool benefits coming out relatively soon. So I guess my caution there is before you immediately go and work on a massive project, I would say wait a few months if you're planning to do that because this will change a little bit. Okay. And Novartis is just an example of a customer who used this. And I think they were able to focus more on the things that matter because they were automating. Now they were a cool example because they were using the Google Analytics API as well, and they had a lot of sites, right? So rather than manually setting up each of these sites, they were able to set up all the accounts and all the properties at least in GA, all the containers that they needed, and get everything all set up automatically. Very cool. If you're interested, this case study is on our website. I don't have a short link for that, but it's on our Tag Manager website. Okay, so the last section, and how much time do we have? 15 minutes. Okay, very cool. So let's see. I think we can get through all this with time for questions. I'm going to keep moving at this pace if it's okay. Okay, so tag smarter, not harder. What is this about, right? So I think I really liked the conversation with the airline in Mexico. I think this is very good because it's about doing things faster, right? Without having to go through all of the coding that would be required if you were going to push things through the data layer. So I want to talk first through what this looks like, and there are different ways you can do this. And I think it depends on your organization, and it depends on how much time you have and how integrated you are with your development team. But the point of this, obviously, is we want to measure beyond just page views. We want to be able to measure all sorts of interactions so that we can get the richest set of data. So, if you were using GA, the analytics.js code, looks something like that, right? Send event, homepage, feature new. It used to be gaq.push, whatever, track event. And essentially, you would have to implement this line of code in these handlers, these event handlers, throughout your website, right? And that involved either a lot of planning with your development team, or involved using clever libraries or leveraging things like jQuery and whatnot to do this more at scale, which was always a hassle as well. So with Google Tag Manager, the most straightforward answer to this is that we also have something similar. You can do data layer.push event, and then you can name that event. If you wanted to, you could pass a whole bunch of variables with this as well, like event category, event action, event label, and you could pull those out with Google Tag Manager and use those in your tags. And I believe this is what you were saying you wanted to avoid, right? And I don't blame you. This is a lot of work still, right? So how else can we do this? Well, I think I have 4 options. This was option 1. And we can talk through what these are. So the first way, this is using a helper function. And a helper function is a function that you would implement on your site. You could implement it using Google Tag Manager and a custom HTML tag. And this one is called Analytics Event. Now I have a present for all of you, and that is this short link here. And this short link will allow you to download a container with all of these examples in it. So if you'd like to try all this out, go to this short link, and you can import it. If I have time, I'll show you how to do that. And you'll be able to get this code without having to type it all up. So in any case, what this is doing is it's pushing this event for us. Right? The benefit of this is that we're abstracting this for our developers, which does two things. The first thing is they don't need to worry about whatever this data layer.push thing is, right? And they don't have to worry about getting the syntax exactly right for that. The second thing it does, when they're looking at the site later on to make changes, they're going to say, oh, wait a minute, this seems like it has something to do with analytics, right? So hopefully before they go and strip something out or get curious about it, or if that IT person leaves, they'll be able to look and see, oh, this is important, I should continue to do this. So this is a great way to have more of a pseudo data model here, one that will allow you to abstract this a little bit and make it easier to implement if you still want to use inline code. And there are companies for whom that's easier, right? Absolutely. And if you were going to do this, you would set up a tag in Google Tag Manager, which was set to pull out these variables and to be triggered when this analytics event happens. And again, I think I have that in this container file. Okay. So the next one is custom data attributes. And this is a similar approach in that you're still having your IT team do something in the elements themselves, but it's maybe a little bit easier because they don't have to worry about this function and putting this in a handler. They can just set up these attributes, data-ga-category. For those of you who are familiar with HTML, you can do data-anything for these attributes of this element. And it'll work, so you can call them whatever you want. And there's 3 steps to this. And those steps are, 1, set up the variables. So you would set up an element attribute. It's an auto event variable set to capture data-ga-category. So this will capture that parameter value when that element is clicked. We set up the trigger, some clicks. Yes, so you can see I'm doing some clever regex things, regular expressions. You don't need to worry too much about this, but I'm saying that it should the data-ga-category should contain at least 1 character here. 1 character at least, as many as it wants. And it should also not be undefined, just in case. And you could also maybe do this with data-ga-action, because category and action are required for GA to measure things properly. And then finally, you'd set up your GA event tag, and you would use this variable in the right place. Again, this example is in that short link, which is there, right? So this is another cool way if you want to have your IT team in control of those data attributes and you have the time and the planning to be able to do that. And the fourth way, and I think this is what we were talking about in the airline example, is to use our click triggers or our auto event triggers that don't require any code, which is awesome, right? There's some downsides to this, right? It's a little bit less robust. If you're keying off of an element ID, and that element ID changes because your development team didn't realize that that's what they were using, your data will stop, right? And I've had this happen to me, and it's a pain, right? So that's the benefit of something like this, because they'll look at it and they'll realize, oh, this is being used for something, right? So if you have the time, I definitely encourage you to use more of a robust technique, but we also want to minimize that back and forth as much as possible. And these click triggers or the other auto event triggers, there's a whole set of them, and there'll be more to come. Things like form submits and whatnot are a great way to do this dynamically, make changes on the fly. And here you can see I'm saying when click ID equals whatever that ID is. A tip, if you're a developer or you're working with your developers, give all your elements meaningful and identifiable attributes. Because if this ID isn't here, this is a lot harder to tag, right, with auto tagging. So just if you have that ability, I recommend being a little bit more thoughtful in how you're tagging these things, creating these elements. Okay, how are we doing on time?
This exists now?
Oh yes, absolutely. Okay, yeah, and this exists. That was the question that came up. So this already exists today. You can do this. We streamlined this recently to make this a little bit easier. Okay. Wait a minute. Oh yeah, so let's take a look. I have a few more examples, and I would say that these examples are kind of bonus examples for you, so if we don't get to all of them, it's okay, but I'm going to continue to go quickly here. What about outbound links? So I just want to give you some ideas of the things that you can do dynamically with Tag Manager, because it's pretty cool. What if we want to send an event to Google Analytics every time somebody clicks on a link that leads to another domain? Seems like something we might want to do. We want to know when people are leaving our website, because maybe they don't come back. So we can do that and say when a link is clicked, just links, and it's some links when the click URL does not contain the current domain, right? Currentwebsite.com. Pretty simple, but what if you have multiple domains, right? That can be a little trickier. So again, don't worry about rigorously writing down, not that anybody is, but rigorously writing down all of this code because it's included in this container. But you can set up a variable with a list of domains that looks like that. Site A.com, B.com, etc. And then here's a JavaScript variable, and I apologize if my JavaScript is poor. I'm not a JavaScript developer by trade, but this will work, I believe, to set up a custom JavaScript variable. And essentially what this is doing is it's splitting this list, right? And then you're going to loop through it and determine if the link that you're clicking on is not one of those links, right? Or actually, this is is-own domain is what I call this. You can't see it there, but it's going to tell you if it is one of your domains or not. And then you can do some clever things based on that. If it is your own domain equals false, then we're going to track this auto outbound link, right? Cool, very scalable way to do this. And as a bonus here, you can use that same domain list in your auto link domains field for cross-domain tracking for Google Analytics. So if you do have multiple domains, this makes it super easy to do outbound link tracking and cross-domain tracking. Okay, we're into bonus examples. How much time do we have, just so I know?
7.
7 minutes, okay. Do you want to hear more examples, or do you want to go to questions? More examples? Okay, awesome. So this is something we added maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, CSS selectors. And is anybody here familiar with CSS selectors already? Do you know what these are? Anybody? Okay, so if you're not familiar with what these are, I don't think I have a link here. Google it. They're really powerful, and they allow you to select. They're actually meant for style sheets. They're meant for CSS, but we're actually enabling them in Google Tag Manager now. So what if I want to measure a click every time somebody clicks a link in this menu, right? There's no attributes here because my development team didn't do what I told them to, and they didn't put the IDs there, right? So actually what I've done, I've said click element, and this exists today if you look at the drop-down for the match types. Match is CSS selector, and this is CSS selector syntax. So you can look this up, you can Google it. One of our other partners, I don't know if any of you know, Simo Ahava, has a good guide on this, but there's also just some general CSS selector guidance out there. What this is saying is ID is the hashtag. ID equals page menu, and this is an asterisk, which means any element. So I'm saying when the click element is any element that's a descendant of this page menu ID. So when any of these elements are clicked, this trigger will work, right? This is cool because you can do things a lot more scalably, right? A lot more in bulk. So maybe you have those 200 and some tags and triggers. Maybe actually you could reduce it and make things more streamlined if you wanted to, right? There's pros and cons to both approaches. Again, this is in this example, so feel free to take a look at that. I think this is the last example I have. So this is a form field custom JavaScript. Again, I apologize for my custom JavaScript, which I didn't mark up with comments at all to keep things complicated. But essentially what you'll do, and I do want to urge some caution with this, because what we're doing is we're capturing field values. And this is one of those examples where you want to be cautious. You're not capturing something that you shouldn't be capturing, like a credit card number or personally identifiable information or things like that. But this is a fairly harmless example here. What's your favorite song? And are you a good dancer, right? And what this will do when somebody submits this form, this JavaScript will run and it will look for an element with this ID. And I have this one marked as element2, EL2, and it will actually grab for me the value selected in that dropdown. So this is a cool thing because I've used this a lot with customers who want to, if you have a contact form and you ask your customers who they are, right, directly. You might ask them, like, let's say you're a bank and you want to ask them, like, are you interested in corporate banking or personal banking? Perfectly harmless example to use. Cool. Grab the value, pass it into a custom dimension, a user scoped custom dimension in GA, and now you have an additional attribute that you can use for segmentation and for those examples that we had this morning, right? Which is pretty handy. So in summary, integrate Tag Manager into your workflows, and there's a lot to think about here. I'm not going to speak through every one of those. And tag smarter, not harder. As much as you can, think about doing things dynamically. So there was a question that came up earlier, and it was about, having such a large container, will that slow things down? And I think the answers that were given were right? In general, it will not slow down the user experience because everything's still asynchronous here, right? So the rest of your site will continue to run in parallel. The one thing I will say is that the larger your container, that container file does need to get downloaded. So it's possible that if you have 200 tags all set to trigger on the same trigger, it's going to take longer to get to one of them.
But
Please.
that compared to having tagged everything on your page, sort of in the...
Yeah, it's kind of a trade-off, right? And it's not going to be terribly harmful to have that many tags and triggers. It's just something to think about. If you can do things dynamically, and like I said, there's ways to do this without tagging everything in your page, right? If you can pull out, let's say, if you have 2 elements with different text and you want to measure each one, rather than setting up an auto event tag and trigger to key off of each one, set up one and have it pull out the click text, the element text, right? And now you have one tag and one trigger that dynamically pulls the right value for you, right? So there's ways to think about doing that a little bit cleaner, right? So I don't know if we have any time. I think we're probably at time, maybe 3 minutes. Okay, so that was, huh? Yeah, I think so. So again, this is that example container. If you don't know how to import this, you can go to our help center and look for import, and it will teach you how to do that, to import that file, because otherwise this is just going to be some file that you have no idea what to do with. I could show you how to do it if we have an extra minute or two, but anybody have any questions? That just means I've shocked everybody. Okay, well, in that case, one question. And while you're asking that question, I'm going to open the UI really quickly and show you how to import it really quickly, as long as I can. But go ahead.
When you have a linked domain, for example, you have 2 domains, domain A and B,
Yep.
and it's the same site. When you trigger, you link the domain, so the session
Mm-hmm.
is the same. No? But when there's an event, for example, in Chile we have a Transbank that you go to Transbank for a pay,
Yes.
pay, and then go back to the domain.
Okay.
Do you lose the session?
So the question was, if you have 2 domains that are linked together and you have somebody that goes from one domain to the other, do you lose?
The third one, that is the one that you pay.
Payment gateway.
Oh, a payment gateway. Yeah, you shouldn't lose the session, no. Yeah, it's the client ID will be stored for the client ID for GA, which is what identifies the user and therefore the session, is stored in a first-party cookie on that domain. So it depends on the flow, right? If you have somebody going from your first domain to a payment gateway to the third domain, if that's the flow, then you might. And it depends on that payment gateway. Sometimes they allow you to pass through the parameters. You'll see the GA client ID parameter there, and if you can pass that through, then that'll work. If it's dropped, yes, you'll lose that.
And the campaign source, for example, you can track it with this the first party cookie, or it's different stuff.
Yeah, so the campaign source gets sent to Google Analytics in the hits and is associated with that user in their session via the client ID. So as long as the client ID is consistent, then it will work.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions? Okay.
I have a question about the loading times when we
Sure.
have too many tags on the page.
Mhm.
It is true that Google Tag Manager works asynchronous, so
Yes.
that the page still loads. But whenever we do the same in a mobile devices, then it's not really the case that it doesn't slow the page down.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. It should not actually slow the page down. Mobile devices, often you're more concerned about the network traffic, and therefore, maybe you're concerned about this container file being so big, which can lead to like additional download time there. There are some, depending on how you analyze the metrics, it might look like it's increasing it. Hopefully, it shouldn't actually be. But there's one other thing I can say, which is Google has been trying to work on this open project called AMP, which are accelerated mobile pages. And this is, if you've used, for example, Facebook Instant, they have their fast loading articles for mobile. Google now has an open project to do the same thing. And if you go to google.com on a mobile device, I'm not sure what the regional availability of it is currently, but that will load the page a lot faster. And we just last week launched new container type in Google Tag Manager for AMP. So now if you want to use AMP, you can use Google Tag Manager and do all of that same analytics, and it doesn't have to download that whole file. The page will load super fast. So that's something to think about and something to look into, because we're definitely encouraging more and more usage of AMP, accelerated mobile pages. The other thing is we do have an integration now with Firebase, which is our mobile development platform. So if you have mobile apps, we also have a pretty good solution for that world as well. That's a different thing. Hopefully that helped. I don't know if if you're seeing slow load times, I would hope that you're not, but it's it's possible if you have a lot of things, like a ton of things happening asynchronously. There's only so many threads that the mobile browser will allow. So it kind of depends on the mobile browser, and it depends on a few things. But generally, I've not seen it to be a problem. So I would be a little bit surprised, but it is possible. I think we're over time. I just wanted to show you one more thing, which is if you go into the admin section of Google Tag Manager and hit import, and then you choose your container file, and I'm going to choose the example one that I've linked you all to download. And now I can choose if I want to import this into a new or existing workspace in this container. I'll choose a new one. That's fine. Import examples. Okay, and we will now overwrite everything here. It's telling me what's being imported. I'm confirming that. And now when I go to that workspace, import examples, if it'll load for me, there we go. So now it has all of the, all of the changes that were just imported are listed here. This is how you can try out this file that I've given to all of you. And it has all of these events and examples in it. So, the other thing I would say is these are just examples, right? This is kind of a start of things you can start to think about. The companies that you're working with, if you're working with Mentalidad Web or the others in other regions, they'll be able to hopefully help you with some of these things and spread them out and do them in a more robust way. So start to think about how you can use Google Tag Manager and definitely work with your partners or use our help resources. So with that, I'm already over time. Thank you very much.